Commander Ethan Rourke stood at the center of the Grand Zalathan ceremonial hall, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room with quiet skepticism. As a decorated human soldier, he wasn't accustomed to such opulent displays of wealth and power. Gleaming crystal walls reflected the soft glow of alien orbs floating above, casting an ethereal light over the gathered dignitaries from across the galaxy. Ethan had been summoned to represent humanity in the fragile peace treaty with the Zalathan Empire, a powerful race known for their towering stature and rigid sense of honor. He had fought against them during the recent war, earning respect and resentment in equal measure. But he hadn't expected this, being called forward in front of the Zalathan king himself. The king, a hulking figure adorned in elaborate golden armor, stepped forward. His deep, booming voice filled the hall. "Commander Ethan Rourke, your courage and tactical brilliance have earned you the admiration of even your fiercest enemies. As a symbol of our new alliance, I grant you a gift." Ethan frowned. He didn't trust gifts, especially from former enemies. "Your Majesty, I appreciate the honor, but—" Before he could finish, a loud scoff echoed through the chamber. A young Zalathan woman strode into view, her silver hair glinting under the lights. Her eyes, a striking violet, burned with defiance. She wore sleek combat armor instead of the ceremonial robes expected at such an event. "This is ridiculous," she declared, glaring at the king. "You can't just hand me over like some object." Ethan's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, hand you over." The king's expression darkened, though his tone remained steady. "Commander Rourke, meet my daughter, Princess Lizera. She has committed grave acts of rebellion against our empire. As punishment, and an opportunity for redemption, I place her under your guardianship." The room erupted in murmurs. Ethan felt his stomach drop. He wasn't sure what was worse, the idea of babysitting a royal, or the fact that she clearly hated the idea as much as he did. Lizera crossed her arms, staring at Ethan with disdain. "I don't need redemption, and I certainly don't need a human telling me what to do." Ethan exhaled sharply. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, I'm a soldier, not a babysitter. This arrangement doesn't seem practical." The king's eyes narrowed. "This is not a request, Commander. It is a condition of our treaty. She will live under your supervision on Earth until I deem her fit to return." Ethan clenched his jaw, his mind racing. He couldn't openly defy the Zalathan king without jeopardizing the fragile peace, but this felt like a trap. He glanced at Lizera, who looked as furious as he felt. "Fine," Ethan finally said, his voice tight. "But let's get one thing straight. This isn't a vacation. You follow my rules, or this alliance is going to be the least of our problems." Lizera smirked, though her eyes flashed with challenge. "Rules? We'll see about that, human." As they left the hall, Ethan muttered under his breath, "This is going to be a disaster." Lizera overheard and grinned. "I couldn't agree more." Ethan Rourke wasn't sure what he had expected from the alien princess, but it definitely wasn't this. Lizera sulked in the back seat of the military hovercar, arms crossed, her sharp violet eyes glaring at the passing scenery. The cityscape of Earth, with its towering skyscrapers and bustling streets, seemed to bore her. "Earth is unimpressive," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Ethan glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his patience already wearing thin. "Glad to know you're already making friends. Keep that attitude, and you'll fit right in." Lizera scoffed. "I don't need to fit in. I'm here because of my father's ridiculous punishment, not because I care about your primitive little planet." Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Let me explain something, Princess. You're not here as a guest. You're here under my command. That means you follow my rules, no exceptions." Lizera leaned forward, her tone icy. "And what if I don't, Commander? What will you do? Ground me like one of your Earth children?" Ethan stopped the car abruptly, the sudden motion making Lizera grab the seat for balance. He turned around, his blue eyes meeting hers with a steely determination. "Listen, I don't know what kind of royal nonsense you're used to, but out here, respect is earned, not given. You don't want to follow my rules. Fine, but don't expect me to save you when this world chews you up and spits you out." For a moment, Lizera said nothing, her defiance faltering. Then she leaned back and muttered, "We'll see." The car pulled up to a heavily secured military base on the outskirts of the city. Ethan led Lizera inside, her curious eyes scanning the technology and personnel bustling around. Despite her earlier bravado, she couldn't hide her fascination with the organized chaos. "This is where you'll be staying," Ethan said, opening the door to a plain but functional living quarters. "It's not a palace, but it's got everything you need. Food dispenser, bed, shower, and—" Lizera interrupted, inspecting the room with a look of disgust. "This is an insult. I'm a princess, not a prisoner." "You're not a princess here," Ethan replied bluntly. "You're just another resident. Deal with it." She turned to him, her glare sharp enough to cut steel. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Ethan smirked. "I don't know what you're talking about." Later that evening, Ethan found Lizera in the base's training yard, watching a group of soldiers sparring in hand-to-hand combat. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes were focused, calculating. "Interested in joining?" Ethan asked, crossing his arms as he approached. Lizera glanced at him. "I could beat any of them with my hands tied." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Big talk for someone who just got exiled to Earth. "Try me," she challenged. Ethan gestured to one of the soldiers. "Sergeant Hayes, spar with our guest." No holding back. What followed was a spectacle. Lizera moved with lightning speed, dodging and countering with precision. Within seconds, Hayes was flat on his back, groaning in defeat. Ethan stared, equal parts impressed and irritated. "All right, princess, you've got some moves. But let's see how you handle a real challenge." Lizera smirked. "Bring it on, Commander." As the two faced off, the other soldiers gathered to watch. The tension between them crackled like static electricity. For the first time, Ethan saw something beyond her arrogance, something fierce and determined, much like himself. Ethan paced his office, the soft hum of Earth's military base in the background. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Zalathan envoy who had arrived earlier in the day seemed far too interested in Lizera's presence. Their eyes lingered on her like hunters sizing up prey, and it set Ethan on edge. Lizera, on the other hand, lounged on his couch, tossing a small Earth-made stress ball between her hands. Her attitude had shifted slightly since their sparring match. Though still defiant, she seemed less hostile, as if grudgingly acknowledging his skill. "You're unusually quiet," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "That's new." Lizera caught the ball midair and rolled her eyes. "I was just wondering how your primitive species managed to survive this long." Ethan smirked. "Ingenuity, grit, and a refusal to quit. You'd be surprised what we can handle." Her smirk faded. "We'll see." Ethan caught the edge in her voice and stopped pacing. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lizera hesitated, then leaned forward, her tone quieter than usual. "That envoy, Trelix. I recognize him. He's not just here to monitor me." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Go on." "He's a loyalist to my father's regime," Lizera continued, "but not in the way you think. He's part of a faction that thrives on chaos. If he's here, it's not for diplomacy. It's to ensure this treaty fails." Ethan studied her carefully, trying to gauge if she was playing some angle. But her expression was serious, her usual arrogance replaced by genuine concern. "Why should I believe you?" he asked. Lizera leaned back, her violet eyes meeting his. "Because if I wanted to see this treaty fail, I'd just walk out of here and let them take me. But I haven't. That should tell you something." Ethan frowned, running a hand through his hair. The last thing he needed was a diplomatic incident, but ignoring her warning could be worse. That evening, Ethan decided to test her claim. He arranged for a casual meeting with Trelix under the guise of discussing security protocols. Lizera insisted on tagging along, though Ethan was reluctant. "If I don't come, he'll know something's wrong," she argued. "Besides, I can read him better than you." Ethan grudgingly agreed, and the two of them met Trelix in a sleek conference room. The Zalathan envoy was tall and imposing, his dark eyes scanning the room with sharp precision. "Commander Rourke," Trelix greeted, his voice smooth but cold. "And Princess Lizera. I must admit, I'm surprised to see you so cooperative." Lizera's jaw tightened, but she forced a smile. "I've learned to adapt." The conversation that followed was layered with subtle barbs and veiled threats. Trelix spoke of peace, but his words carried an undercurrent of menace. Ethan watched him closely, catching small tells, shifts in tone, the twitch of a hand, suggesting he wasn't being entirely honest. When the meeting ended, Lizera and Ethan exchanged a glance. They both knew the truth. Trelix was planning something. Back in Ethan's office, Lizera broke the silence. "He's here to sabotage the treaty. I'm sure of it." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll stop him. But we do it my way." Lizera tilted her head, a flicker of respect crossing her face. "Your way better be good, human." Ethan smiled grimly. "You'll see. Just try not to get in the way." For the first time, Lizera didn't argue. Whatever lay ahead, they were in it together. Ethan leaned over the holographic map in his office, tracing a finger along the layout of the military base. Every corridor, every blind spot. It all needed to be perfect for what he was planning. Across the table, Lizera sat with her arms crossed, her violet eyes narrowed. "You're really going to take on Trelix without informing your superiors?" she asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. Ethan didn't look up. "If I inform them, it'll take days of bureaucratic back and forth, and by then, it'll be too late. We don't have that kind of time." Lizera leaned back in her chair, smirking. "Breaking the rules already. Maybe you're not as rigid as I thought." Ethan glanced at her. "This isn't about breaking rules. It's about stopping a threat. If you've got a better plan, I'm all ears." For a moment, Lizera said nothing. Then, to Ethan's surprise, she stood and moved to his side of the table. "Fine. Let's hear this so-called brilliant plan of yours." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're helping me." "Don't get used to it," she said sharply. "I have my reasons. Besides, if Trelix wins, your precious treaty falls apart, and we both lose." As they worked together, it became clear that their alliance, while uneasy, was effective. Lizera's knowledge of Zalathan technology and culture filled in gaps that Ethan hadn't even realized existed. In turn, Ethan's tactical experience and methodical approach grounded Lizera's often impulsive ideas. "You humans are annoyingly precise," Lizera muttered as Ethan rechecked their plan for the third time. "And you Zalathans are frustratingly reckless," Ethan shot back. "That's why this works." Lizera allowed herself a small smile, though she quickly hid it. "If you say so." The operation began that night. Under the cover of darkness, Ethan and Lizera infiltrated the restricted sector of the base where Trelix and his entourage were staying. Every step was calculated, every move silent. Ethan was impressed by how effortlessly Lizera moved, her agility and instincts honed to perfection. "You've done this before," Ethan whispered as they crouched behind a stack of crates. Lizera gave him a wry look. "You don't lead a rebellion without learning a few tricks." They reached the envoy's quarters, where a guard stood watch. Lizera gestured for Ethan to stay put, then disappeared into the shadows. Moments later, the guard crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Ethan stared. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." "You already are," she whispered with a smirk. "Now, move." Inside the quarters, they found a secure terminal. Lizera quickly bypassed the lock, her fingers flying over the alien controls. Ethan watched her work, impressed despite himself. "This is it," Lizera said, her voice low. "Trelix's entire plan. Sabotage the treaty, frame me as the instigator, and incite a new war. Ethan's jaw tightened. We need to get this to someone who will listen. Lizara's expression darkened. And who's going to believe us? Your people don't trust me, and mine want me silenced. Ethan nodded grimly. Then we make them believe. But first, we need to get out of here. As they slipped back into the night, alarms suddenly blared across the base. They had been discovered. Ethan cursed under his breath as guards swarmed the area. Looks like your plan wasn't as perfect as you thought, Lizara said, drawing a blade from her belt. Ethan grinned, adrenaline surging. Guess we improvise. You ready? Lizara's eyes gleamed with determination. Always. Together, they plunged into the chaos, their uneasy alliance the only thing keeping them alive. The chaos of the alarms echoed through the base as Ethan and Lizara darted through the shadows, narrowly avoiding patrols. The stolen data crystal containing Trilix's plans was clutched tightly in Ethan's hand. They had managed to retrieve the evidence, but now the hard part began, surviving long enough to expose it. This way, Ethan whispered, leading Lizara down a maintenance tunnel. His years of service on the base gave him an edge, knowing shortcuts and hidden passages that most wouldn't think to check. Lizara followed closely, her blade still in hand. Do you always run your operations this smoothly? She asked, her tone laced with sarcasm. Ethan smirked despite the tension. Only when I'm babysitting rebellious princesses. She shot him a glare but didn't reply. The urgency of their situation left no room for banter. They reached a secluded communication room, one of the few places where they could transmit the evidence without immediate interception. Ethan quickly worked the terminal while Lizara stood guard by the door, her sharp senses tuned to every sound. Hurry up, she urged. They won't take long to track us. I'm going as fast as I can, Ethan replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The system was old but secure, perfect for getting the data to trusted allies without alerting Trilix's loyalists. Just as the upload reached 75%, a familiar voice crackled over the base intercom. It was Trilix, his calm and calculated tone sending chills down their spines. Commander Rourke, Princess Lizara, I admire your resourcefulness, but you've gone too far. Surrender now, and I may spare your lives. Lizara snorted. He's bluffing. Ethan didn't look up. Maybe, but we can't afford to find out. Keep watching that door. As the upload completed, the terminal pinged with a success notification. Ethan grabbed the crystal and turned to Lizara. Done. Let's move. Before they could take a step, the door burst open. A group of armed guards stormed in, weapons drawn. Lizara and Ethan dropped into defensive stances, ready to fight. But then, to their shock, someone familiar stepped through the doorway. Zalak, one of Lizara's former allies from her rebellion. His imposing figure and fierce expression should have been a welcome sight, but something was off. Zalak, Lizara said, her voice filled with disbelief. What are you doing here? Zalak's gaze was cold. I'm here to end this madness, Lizara. You've caused enough trouble for the Empire. Her heart sank as the realization hit. You're working for Trilix. I'm working for stability, he shot back. Your rebellion was a mistake, and now you're dragging Earth into the mess you created. Ethan stepped forward, his weapon at the ready. If you're here to stop us, you're part of the problem. Zalak ignored him, his focus on Lizara. You should have stayed in exile, Lizara. It would have been easier for everyone. Before Lizara could respond, a firefight erupted. The confined space turned into chaos, with blaster fire ricocheting off the walls. Ethan and Lizara fought side by side, their movements synchronized in a way neither had expected. But the odds were against them. In the end, they barely managed to escape, slipping through a ventilation shaft just as reinforcements arrived. Lizara's face was pale, her usual confidence shaken. Zalak was my friend, she muttered, more to herself than to Ethan. I trusted him. Ethan glanced at her, his voice steady. Trust is a dangerous thing in war. Focus on what we can control. She nodded, her resolve hardening. Then let's finish this. As they disappeared into the night, it became clear betrayal had made their mission even more dangerous, but it also solidified their determination to stop Trilix, no matter the cost. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city provided a temporary refuge for Ethan and Lizera. The air was heavy with dust, and the only light came from the faint glow of a portable lamp Ethan had set up. Lizera paced back and forth, her frustration radiating off her like heat. "I should have seen it coming," she muttered, her fists clenched. Zalek was always too willing to compromise. Ethan, sitting on a crate and checking his weapon, glanced up. "You can't blame yourself for someone else's choices." Lizera stopped pacing and turned to him, her violet eyes sharp. "You don't understand. He was like family to me. I trusted him with my life." Ethan stood, his tone calm but firm. "I've been betrayed before. It's a gut punch, no doubt. But right now, we don't have the luxury of wallowing in regret. We've got a mission to finish." She stared at him for a long moment before signing and slumping onto a nearby crate. "How do you do it? Keep going when everything feels broken." Ethan leaned against the wall, his expression softening. "You focus on what's worth fighting for. For me, it's the people who rely on me. My team, my planet. What about you?" Lizera hesitated, then admitted, "I wanted to make my people better, free them from corruption. But now, I don't even know if they're worth it." "They're worth it," Ethan said firmly. "Maybe not all of them, but enough. And you're not the type to quit, no matter what you say." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "You're annoyingly perceptive, human." Their moment of calm was shattered by a distant rumble. Ethan grabbed his weapon, his instincts kicking in. Lizera was on her feet instantly, her blade in hand. "They found us," Ethan said, peeking through a crack in the boarded-up window. Outside, a group of Trilix's loyalists was approaching, their footsteps echoing in the night. Lizera grinned, a dangerous glint in her eyes. "Good. I was getting bored." Ethan shot her a look. "This isn't a game. We're outnumbered and outgunned." "That's never stopped me before," she replied, already moving toward the door. Ethan groaned but followed. "Fine, but stick to the plan. We lure them into the warehouse and take them out one by one. No heroics." Lizera rolled her eyes. "You're no fun." The fight that followed was brutal and chaotic. The dimly lit warehouse became a battleground, with shadows dancing across the walls as blaster fire lit up the room. Ethan's precise shots and Lizera's fluid, lethal movements turned the tide, their teamwork growing stronger with each passing second. At one point, Lizera saved Ethan from an ambush, her blade slicing through an attacker just as they raised their weapon. "You're welcome," she said smugly. "Don't get cocky," Ethan shot back, though a small grin crept onto his face. When the dust settled, the warehouse was littered with unconscious enemies. Ethan and Lizera stood in the middle, breathing heavily but victorious. For the first time, they shared a look of mutual respect. "Not bad," Ethan admitted, "for a princess." Lizera smirked. "Not bad yourself, for a stubborn human." As they prepared to move to a new location, Ethan spoke. "We can't win this alone. We'll need allies." Lizera nodded, her determination renewed. "Then let's find some. But first, let's make Trilix regret underestimating us." Together, they stepped into the night, their uneasy alliance forged into an unbreakable bond. They were ready to face whatever came next. The underground hideout buzzed with tension as Ethan and Lizera prepared for their most dangerous mission yet. The data crystal they had secured wasn't just proof of Trilix's plans. It was the key to exposing a web of corruption that stretched from the Zalathan Empire to factions on Earth. The challenge was delivering it to the right people before Trilix silenced them for good. Ethan adjusted his combat vest, his movements methodical as he loaded his weapons. Across the room, Lizera was suiting up in lightweight Zalathan battle armor she had managed to salvage. The sleek, silvery material hugged her form, a sharp contrast to Ethan's rugged military gear. "You ready for this?" Ethan asked, his tone steady. Lizera smirked, her violet eyes gleaming. "I was born ready. What about you, Commander? Think you can keep up?" Ethan chuckled. "Just try not to get yourself captured again, Princess." Their banter was interrupted by a holographic projection of Captain Rice, one of Ethan's few trusted allies in the Earth military. His image flickered as he spoke. "Rourke, this is your last chance to back out. If Trelix catches wind of this, there's no coming back." "We're not backing out," Ethan said firmly. "We have the proof. We just need you to keep the airwaves clear long enough for us to broadcast it." Rice hesitated, then nodded. "Understood. Good luck." The operation began under the cover of night. Ethan and Lizera infiltrated the main Zalathan consulate in the heart of the city. The towering structure, built with alien architecture, shimmered like a giant crystal under the moonlight. Using a combination of Ethan's military tactics and Lizera's knowledge of Zalathan technology, they bypassed the outer security. Each step forward brought them closer to the central broadcast room, where they could upload the damning evidence. But Trelix was waiting for them. As they entered the broadcast chamber, the air felt heavy with tension. Trelix stood at the center of the room, flanked by armed guards. His dark eyes glinted with triumph as he clapped slowly. "Well done, Commander Rourke. And you, Princess Lizera. I must admit, I underestimated your resourcefulness." Lizera stepped forward, her blade in hand. "It's over, Trelix. We have the evidence. Your plans are finished." Trelix chuckled, his voice calm and measured. "Do you really think a single broadcast will stop me? The galaxy thrives on power, not truth." Ethan raised his weapon, his gaze cold. "Maybe. But it's a start." What followed was a fierce battle. Trelix's guards moved with precision, but Ethan and Lizera fought with unmatched determination. Ethan's blaster fire created cover as Lizera darted between enemies, her blade a blur of silver light. Together, they were an unstoppable force. In the chaos, Ethan managed to reach the console. As he worked to upload the data, Trelix lunged at him. Lizera intercepted, her blade locking with Trelix's in a dazzling clash of energy. "You've lost," she hissed, her strength fueled by years of anger and betrayal. Trelix snarled, pushing back. "You're a fool, Lizera. This will change nothing." But before he could strike again, Ethan yelled, "It's done." The broadcast went live, the evidence streaming across every major channel in the galaxy. Trelix froze, his face a mask of rage and fear as his plans unraveled before him. The pair barely escaped as the consulate erupted into chaos. Outside, they watched as news outlets reported on Trelix's corruption and the conspiracy within the Zalathan Empire. For the first time, Lizera allowed herself a genuine smile. "We did it," she said softly. Ethan nodded, his expression tired but satisfied. "Yeah, we did." Their victory wasn't without cost, but it was a turning point. Together, they had not only saved the fragile alliance, but also ignited hope for a better future. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Ethan turned to Lizera. "What now?" She grinned, a spark of mischief returning to her eyes. "Now, we make sure they don't forget who did this." Ethan chuckled. "I like the sound of that." They walked away, knowing their fight wasn't over. But neither were they. The aftermath of the broadcast rippled across the galaxy. Trelix's corruption had been exposed, and his power base crumbled within hours. News channels across Earth and the Zalathan Empire reported his arrest, along with the dismantling of the conspiracies he had orchestrated. The fragile treaty between humans and Zalathans now stood on firmer ground. Ethan and Lizera, however, were not basking in their victory. They were back at the military base, seated in the debriefing room. Ethan's superior, General Carter, eyed them with a mixture of admiration and frustration. "You two have a talent for creating chaos," Carter said, his stern face cracking into a faint smile. But you've done something remarkable. You saved the treaty, and possibly the galaxy. Ethan shifted in his chair. We did what had to be done, sir. Nothing more. Carter turned to Lizera, his expression softening. Princess Lizera, I owe you an apology. Your efforts, while unconventional, proved invaluable. Lizera tilted her head, her voice calm but firm. I'm not looking for apologies, General. I'm looking for change. My people deserve better, and so do yours. Carter nodded. Then we'll work toward that. Together. Later that day, Ethan found Lizera on the base's rooftop, staring out at the city skyline. She had shed her battle armor, dressed instead in simple earth attire that seemed out of place but oddly fitting. Figured you'd be here, Ethan said, leaning against the railing beside her. Lizera glanced at him, her expression unreadable. It's quieter up here. Gives me time to think. What's on your mind? He asked. She sighed, her gaze drifting to the horizon. My father, my people, everything we've been through. I can't go back, Ethan. Not to the way things were. You don't have to, he replied. You've proven you're more than just a princess. You're a leader, Lizera, whether your father sees it or not. Her eyes softened. And what about you? What happens now for the great Commander Ethan Rourke? He chuckled. Back to doing what I do best, protecting Earth and annoying intergalactic royalty. Lizera smirked. You're quite good at both. Their quiet moment was interrupted by a commotion below. Soldiers and civilians alike were gathering around large holoscreens, watching the latest news reports. Ethan and Lizera joined the crowd. Their curiosity piqued. The screens displayed a live address from King Zalathar, Lizera's father. His usually imposing figure looked weary, his tone more humble than authoritative. To my daughter, Lizera, he began, and to the humans who stood beside her, I owe you a debt of gratitude. Your courage has reminded me of what it means to lead with integrity. I vow to rebuild our empire on the foundation of justice and truth. Lizera's breath hitched as she listened. It wasn't an apology, but it was more than she had expected. Ethan nudged her. Looks like you got through to him. She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. Maybe. Or maybe he's finally learning what leadership means. As the crowd dispersed, Ethan turned to her. So, what's next for you, Princess? Lizera crossed her arms, her violet eyes gleaming with determination. I stay here. Earth still has much to teach me, and I have much to teach you. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You're staying. Isn't that going to ruffle some royal feathers? She grinned. Let them be ruffled. This is where I belong now. Ethan laughed, extending a hand. Well, welcome to Earth. Try not to cause too much trouble. Lizera took his hand, her grip firm. No promises. As they stood together, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Their journey wasn't over, but for the first time, they faced the future not as enemies or reluctant allies, but as partners ready to forge a new legacy.